The old veteran stood silently at the parade's edge, his weathered service cap clutched against his chest as the flag passed by. When a young man suddenly stepped forward and spat directly on his metal-adorned jacket, not a single person in the watching crowd moved to intervene. They simply turned away, as if this kind of disrespect was somehow acceptable in today's world. The veteran didn't flinch, didn't retaliate, just quietly wiped his jacket with a trembling hand while his eyes remained fixed on that passing flag, the same flag he'd spent 30 years of his life defending. But what the crowd didn't know was that halfway across town, in a nearby Marine Corps base, 3 battle-hardened Marines were about to receive a phone call that would change everything. What drove this decorated war hero to silently endure such humiliation, and why did his response leave even the hardened Marines in tears? Subscribe to our channel to witness more powerful stories of dignity, honor, and justice that need to be told. Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she gripped her phone, her knuckles white against the pink case her daughter had picked out. The parade continued down Main Street, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the elderly veteran who stood with such dignity despite the assault he'd just endured. As a military spouse herself, she'd seen her share of disrespect toward service members. But this was different. This was cruel, deliberate, and worse. Met with complete apathy from the crowd, she noticed something else too, something that made her heart skip a beat. On the veteran's jacket, partially obscured by the glob of spit but unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were looking at, was a distinctive medal she'd only seen in photographs and military museums. Her husband, an active-duty Marine, had told her stories about that particular decoration, the Silver Star with Special Citation, awarded for extraordinary valor. The crowd continued to mill about, some pretending nothing had happened, others shooting furtive glances at the old veteran before quickly looking away. A few had their phones out, probably already uploading the incident to social media, turning one man's humiliation into entertainment. But Sarah saw how the veteran's eyes never left the flag, how his posture remained ramrod straight despite his age, how his fingers gently wiped his jacket with a handkerchief that looked as old as his service. She knew what she had to do. Her husband had always told her about the sacred bond between Marines, past and present. With slightly steadier hands now, she opened her contacts and scrolled to the number for the local Marine Corps base. She'd called it enough times to have it memorized, but this would be different from checking on commissary hours or asking about family day events. As she pressed the call button, she watched the veteran slowly turn away from the parade route, his movements measured and deliberate. Despite everything, he folded his handkerchief with precision, tucked it into his pocket, and began walking away with the same dignity he'd shown throughout the incident. She noticed how he touched the metal on his jacket almost unconsciously, like a man holding on to something precious that the world had forgotten. Marine Corps Base Operations, Staff Sergeant Martinez speaking. "How may I assist you?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I need to report something that just happened at the Memorial Day Parade. It's about a veteran, and sir, he's wearing a Silver Star with Special Citation." The line went silent for a moment. When Martinez spoke again, his voice had changed. "Ma'am, could you please tell me everything you saw? Don't leave out a single detail." Staff Sergeant Ramon Martinez sat perfectly still in his office chair, his phone pressed tightly against his ear as he listened to Sarah Mitchell's account. 20 years in the Corps had taught him when to pay attention, and everything about this situation demanded his full focus. His free hand was already typing commands into the database, searching for Silver Star recipients in the area. "The medal had a special marking, you said? Could you describe it again?" He pulled up another screen, narrowing the search parameters. Special citations were rare, very rare. Each one had a story behind it that any Marine worth their salt should know. "It looked like a V device with additional marking," Sarah explained, her voice growing more confident. "My husband said he'd only seen one like it in photographs from Vietnam." Martinez's fingers froze over the keyboard. There was only one Silver Star with that particular designation from that era registered in their state. His eyes scanned the service record appearing on his screen, and he felt his throat tighten. "Ma'am, stay where you are. I'm sending a team." He was already on his feet, grabbing his cover. "And Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for making this call. You did the right thing." Within minutes, Martinez was striding down the hallway of the administration building, his footsteps echoing with purpose. He stopped at 2 offices, calling out names that would forever be linked to what was about to unfold. "Gunnery Sergeant Cooper, Staff Sergeant Ramirez, get your covers and meet me at my vehicle. We've got a situation involving a decorated veteran of Khe Sanh." The response was immediate. Both Marines emerged from their offices, recognizing the urgency in Martinez's voice. They'd worked together long enough to read each other's signals, and right now, everything about Martinez's demeanor spoke of something serious. In the parking lot, Martinez briefed them quickly, his words precise and measured. "Thomas Wheeler, Silver Star recipient, 1968, Khe Sanh. Just had some punk spit on him at the Memorial Day parade." He paused, letting that sink in. His citation reads like something out of a movie. "Held off an entire NVA company single-handedly to protect a downed medevac. Saved 23 Marines that day, including a general's son." Cooper's jaw tightened. "Wheeler? The Wheeler? From the Battle of Hill 881? "The same," Martinez confirmed, starting the engine. "And apparently he's been living right here in our town all this time, completely under the radar." Ramirez, the youngest of the 3, was already on his tablet, pulling up more information. "Sir, I'm finding multiple commendations beyond the Silver Star. Purple Heart, Bronze Star with Combat Vi, Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry." His voice trailed off as he continued reading. "And now some kid just spit on him while an entire crowd watched and did nothing." Martinez's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. "We're going to fix this, Marines, today." As they drove toward the parade route, each Marine was lost in their own thoughts. They'd all seen the changes in how veterans were treated, the growing disconnect between civilians and military personnel. But this was different. This was personal. "Mrs. Mitchell said he walked north on Mason Street," Martinez said, turning onto the main road. "She's going to meet us at the coffee shop on the corner. Said Wheeler sometimes stops there." "What's the plan, sir?" Cooper asked, though his tone suggested he already had several ideas of his own. "First, we find him. Then we make sure he knows that no Marine gets disrespected on our watch. After that," Martinez paused, checking his mirrors as he changed lanes. "After that, we remind this town what it means to honor those who served. And we find the individual who thought it was acceptable to spit on a man who saved nearly 2 dozen American lives in one of the bloodiest battles of Vietnam." The car fell silent again, but it was a silence filled with purpose. 3 Marines, 3 generations of service, united in a mission to right a wrong. As they approached downtown, they could still see the remnants of the parade, flags waving, people dispersing, a scene of celebration that had been marred by one act of disrespect. "There's Mrs. Mitchell," Ramirez pointed to a woman in a blue dress, waving from the coffee shop entrance. Martinez pulled the car into a parking spot and turned to his fellow Marines. "Remember, gentlemen, we're not just representing ourselves. Here, we're representing every Marine who's ever worn the uniform, especially those who never came home. Let's do this right." They stepped out of the car in perfect unison, their movements crisp and practiced. The small crowd of parade-goers still lingering on the sidewalk parted instinctively, recognizing authority when they saw it. Sarah Mitchell was already walking toward them, her expression a mixture of relief and anticipation. The mission to restore a hero's honor had begun. Thomas Wheeler walked slowly down Mason Street, his footsteps as measured as they had been during his decades of service. The parade sounds faded behind him, replaced by the quiet hum of a town going about its business, unaware of what had just transpired. His jacket, the one he'd maintained with such care since his retirement, felt heavy on his shoulders, weighted not just by medals, but by memories. He touched the damp spot where the young man's spit had landed, now mostly dried in the warm May sun. In his 73 years, he'd faced far worse than this. The horrors of Khe Sanh, the screams of wounded Marines, the weight of command decisions that meant life or death. A stranger's spit was nothing compared to that. Yet something about this moment felt different. Perhaps it was the crowd's reaction, or rather, their lack of one. In his day, such disrespect wouldn't have gone unchallenged, but times had changed, and Wheeler had changed with them. He'd learned to carry his honors quietly, to bear witness to the shifting tides of public opinion without letting it dim his pride in his service. The bell above Charlie's coffee shop chimed as he pushed open the door. The familiar scent of coffee and pastries wrapped around him like an old friend. Charlie, the owner, nodded from behind the counter, one of the few people in town who still treated him like a human being rather than a relic. The usual Mr. Wheeler? Charlie called out, already reaching for the large black coffee cup. Just Tom today, Charlie. Just Tom. Wheeler settled into his usual corner booth, the one that gave him a clear view of both the door and the street outside. Old habits died hard. As Charlie brought over his coffee, Wheeler's mind drifted back to another time, another place. The humid air of Vietnam, the taste of mud and gunpowder, the weight of his M16 as he crawled through the underbrush, leading his men toward what would become the defining moment of his military career. The medevac helicopter had gone down just before dawn, its pilot desperately trying to evacuate wounded Marines from Hill 881. Wheeler's platoon was the closest to the crash site, but between them and the downed chopper was an entire company of NVA regulars, all too eager to add more American casualties to their count. Wheeler took a sip of his coffee, his hand steady despite the memory. He could still hear his own voice giving the order. "Second platoon, we're going in. Those are our brothers down there." No hesitation, no doubt, just the certainty that comes with knowing what needs to be done. The coffee shop's window reflected his image. An old man now, white-haired and weathered, but still sitting ramrod straight. His fingers unconsciously traced the outline of the silver star through his jacket. The metal felt warm, as if it remembered that day too. For 6 hours, he and his men had held that position. When their ammunition ran low, they'd scrounged rounds. From the fallen, when the radio died, they'd used hand signals. When the NVA rushed their position, they'd fought hand to hand. Not a single additional Marine had died on his watch that day. "More coffee, Tom?" Charlie's voice pulled him back. "To the present," Wheeler nodded, managing a small smile. Charlie was too young to understand, but he was one of the good ones. He'd once offered Wheeler a veterans eat free deal, but Wheeler had declined. He wasn't looking for handouts or special treatment, just the simple dignity of being treated like anyone else. Outside the window, people walked past, some still carrying small flags from the parade. A few glanced in his direction, probably wondering why an old man was sitting alone in a coffee shop on Memorial Day. None of them knew that they were walking past a living piece of history, a man who had earned his place in the annals of Marine Corps legend. Wheeler didn't mind their ignorance. He'd made his peace with anonymity long ago. His medals weren't for show. They were reminders of the promises he'd kept, the lives he'd saved, and the brothers he'd lost. Let the world change around him, some things remained constant. Honor, duty, the unbreakable bond between Marines. He finished his coffee just as 3 shadows fell across his table. Looking up, Wheeler found himself staring into the faces of 3 Marine Corps officers, their presence as unexpected as it was official. The lead Marine's eyes fixed on the silver star, and Wheeler saw something he recognized, the look of one Marine recognizing another. The world around him suddenly seemed very quiet. Staff Sergeant Martinez took point, approaching Wheeler's table with measured steps. The coffee shop had gone quiet, other customers sensing the gravity of the moment. Behind him, Cooper and Ramirez maintained perfect formation, their presence commanding attention without demanding it. "Mr. Wheeler," Martinez said, his voice carrying the weight of institutional respect. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, Marine Corps Base Hamilton. These are Gunnery Sergeant Cooper and Staff Sergeant Ramirez." He paused, noting how Wheeler's posture had instinctively straightened even further. "Sir, we understand there was an incident at the parade today." Wheeler's weathered hands remained steady on his coffee cup. "Nothing worth troubling yourselves over, Staff Sergeant." His voice was quiet but clear, carrying the kind of authority that came from years of command. "I've had worse." "Sir, with respect," Cooper stepped forward, "any disrespect to a Marine, especially one with your service record, is worth troubling ourselves over." Wheeler's eyes sharpened. "My service record?" Martinez nodded to Ramirez, who produced a tablet and began reading. "Thomas Wheeler, Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. Silver Star with Special Citation, Hill 881. Khe Sanh, 1968, led a 6-hour defense of a downed medevac under heavy enemy fire, saving 23 Marines." Ramirez looked up. "Sir, you're a legend at the base. We study your actions at Hill 881 in our tactical training." The older Marine's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "That was a lifetime ago, son." "No, sir," Martinez said firmly. "That was yesterday." In the Corps, time doesn't diminish what you did, what you sacrificed, what you earned. He gestured to the chair across from Wheeler. "May we join you?" Wheeler nodded, and the 3 Marines took seats around the table. Charlie appeared with fresh coffee for everyone, moving with unusual quietness, recognizing the significance of what was unfolding in his shop. "We're here because a member of our community witnessed what happened," Martinez continued. "She recognized your Silver Star and knew what it meant. Sir, we can't undo what that young man did, but we can ensure it doesn't go unanswered." Wheeler studied each of their faces in turn. "You've got better things to do than worry about an old man getting disrespected at a parade." "No, sir, we don't," Cooper replied. "You know as well as anyone, Marines take care of their own, past, present, and future. The Corps has changed." Wheeler said softly, looking out the window. "The world has changed. Some things haven't changed, sir," Ramirez spoke up. "Honor hasn't changed. Duty hasn't changed. And the debt we owe to those who came before us, that definitely hasn't changed." Martinez pulled out his phone, showing Wheeler a social media post that was already gaining traction. The video of the incident had been uploaded, comments ranging from outrage to cruel amusement. "This is spreading, sir, but not for the reasons that punk intended. People are starting to ask questions about who you are, about that medal, about what it means." Wheeler's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "I didn't earn those medals for recognition." "No, sir, you didn't," Martinez agreed. "You earned them, doing what had to be done, saving Marines who needed saving, just like we're doing what needs to be done now." He leaned forward. "Sir, we're not here just because of what happened today. We're here because for too long, this town, this country, has been forgetting what service means, forgetting what sacrifice looks like, forgetting that heroes walk among us every day." The coffee shop had grown even quieter, other customers openly watching now. Charlie stood behind his counter, wiping the same spot over and over, clearly hanging on every word. "What exactly are you proposing, Staff Sergeant?" Wheeler asked, his tone carrying the familiar note of a Marine evaluating a tactical situation. "First, sir, we find the individual responsible," Martinez said, "not for revenge, for education. Then, with your permission, we remind this community what it means to honor its veterans, not just with parades and flags, but with real understanding, real respect." Wheeler was silent for a long moment, his fingers absently touching the Silver Star again. When he spoke, his voice carried decades of both strength and weariness. "You know why I never talked about that day on Hill 881, because the real heroes didn't come home. They gave everything they had, and the world just kept turning, kept forgetting." "Then help us remember them, sir," Cooper said softly. "Help us make sure their sacrifice isn't forgotten." Outside, a group of parade goers passed by, their small flags fluttering in the breeze. Wheeler watched them, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned back to the 3 Marines. "All right," he said, his voice taking on the unmistakable tone of command. "What's our first move?" The memories came in waves as Wheeler sat in his modest living room later that evening, surrounded by the 3 Marines who had tracked him down. The incident at the parade had cracked open, a door he'd kept firmly shut for decades, and now the past was flooding back with startling clarity. "Hill 881, he said quietly, his eyes focused on something far beyond the room's walls. February 23, 1968. The air was thick with fog that morning. We could barely see 50 yards ahead. He paused, taking a measured breath. The medevac call came in just before dawn. Charlie had hit a patrol hard, multiple casualties, urgent extraction needed. Martinez, Cooper, and Ramirez sat in respectful silence, understanding they were witnessing something rare, a living legend breaking decades of silence. The chopper went down about half a click from our position, took some heavy fire from a hidden machine gun nest. We heard the crash, then the radio calls. 5 wounded Marines on board, plus the 3-man crew, all alive, but trapped. Wheeler's hand, still steady after all these years, traced an invisible map on his knee. NVA forces were closing in fast. Command said reinforcements were 2 hours out minimum. The old Marine stood, moving to a small cabinet in the corner. He opened it carefully, revealing a meticulously organized collection of military memorabilia. From a worn leather folder, he withdrew a yellowed piece of paper. His original orders from that day. 2nd Platoon was 23 Marines strong that morning, average age 19. Most had never seen real combat before Khe Sanh. He handed the paper to Martinez. We were supposed to hold our position, wait for reinforcements. Those were our orders. But you didn't, Ramirez said softly. No, son, we didn't. Wheeler's voice took on a deeper resonance. Because sometimes orders have to yield to a higher calling. Those were our brothers down there. Every minute we waited was another minute they might not have. He reached back into the cabinet, this time pulling out a faded photograph. 8 young Marines covered in mud and grime, grinning at the camera. This was taken 2 days before. Only 3 of us made it home. His finger rested on one face in particular. Jimmy Chen, 19 years old, first-generation American, carried our radio that day. When it got hit, he held the antenna together with his bare hands to maintain communication, even as the enemy fire got closer. The room felt charged with emotion as Wheeler continued. We moved out at 05:30, used the fog for cover, had to belly crawl. The last 200 yards through mud and shell craters. The NVA had the high ground, but they weren't expecting anyone to be crazy enough to advance under those conditions. He pulled out another document, the official after-action report. We hit their flank hard, created enough confusion to split their attention. That's when I saw our opening. Wheeler's voice grew quieter. I ordered the platoon to lay down, suppressing fire while I made a run for the chopper. Had to know if anyone was still alive in there. Martinez studied the report, his eyes widening. Sir, this says you crossed 50 yards of open ground under heavy fire. 53 yards. To be exact, Wheeler smiled faintly. Felt like 53 miles. Found all 8 men alive, but trapped. The pilot had managed to put her down in a depression that gave them some cover, but they were pinned down. No way to reach the medical supplies. 2 of the wounded were critical. He stood again, moving to the window. Outside, the evening was settling over the quiet suburban street, a world away from the hell he was describing. What happened next? Well, that's what they wrote up in the citation. 6 hours of holding that position, using every trick we knew, every bit of training we had. When we ran out of ammunition, we threw rocks to make them think we were lobbing grenades. When they rushed us, we fought hand to hand. Wheeler turned back to his visitors. But here's what that citation doesn't tell you. Every single Marine in that platoon was a hero that day. Every single one. The ones who made it home, and especially the ones who didn't. They didn't fight for medals or recognition. They fought for each other. Because that's what Marines do. His voice cracked slightly for the first time. And today, some young man, who's never known that kind of brotherhood, who's never had to trust his life to the Marine next to him, thought it was okay to spit on what we stood for, what we fought for, what we died for. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of evening traffic. Finally, Martinez spoke. "Sir, that's exactly why we're here. Not just because of what happened today, but because your story, their story, needs to be told. The world needs to remember." Wheeler picked up the photograph again, looking at those young faces frozen in time. "Maybe you're right, Staff Sergeant. Maybe it's time to break the silence. Not for me, but for them, for Jimmy Chen, for all of them." He carefully returned the items to his cabinet, closing it with a gentle click. When he turned back to the three Marines, his eyes held a familiar fire, the same fire that had driven him across 53 yards of hell to save his fellow Marines. "Tell me what you need me to do." The search for the young man who had spat on Wheeler began methodically the next morning. Martinez had coordinated with local law enforcement, while Cooper worked his connections in the veteran community. Ramirez, being the most tech-savvy, focused on tracking the incidents spread across social media. "The video's gone viral," Ramirez reported from his laptop in the base operations center. "Over 50,000 shares since yesterday. Comments are overwhelmingly supportive of the veteran, Mr. Wheeler, though most don't know who he is yet." He scrolled through the feed. Several people have tagged local news stations. Martinez leaned over Ramirez's shoulder, studying the footage. "Freeze it there." The image showed the moment just before the incident. The young man's face was clearly visible, his expression a mask of contempt. "Enhancement? Already on it, sir." Ramirez typed rapidly, the image sharpening. Clear shot of his face, distinctive tattoo on his right forearm. Running it through local databases now. Sarah Mitchell had joined them, having taken a personal day from work to assist. Her husband, currently deployed overseas, had called in some additional favors. "The tattoo looks like a local artist's work," she noted. "I recognize the style. There's a shop on 4th Street that does similar designs." Cooper entered the room carrying a stack of printouts. "Got something. Local veterans at the VFW remember this kid. He's been showing up at their events, causing trouble, always just shy of requiring police intervention." He laid out several photographs. "Jacob Turner, age 24, lives on the east side of town." "Turner?" Martinez's head snapped up. "Any relation to Master Sergeant David Turner?" Cooper nodded grimly. "His grandson." The room fell silent. Master Sergeant David Turner was a name every Marine at the base knew, a decorated Vietnam veteran who had passed away 3 years ago. He had been a fixture at base events, mentoring young Marines until his death. "That can't be a coincidence," Sarah said quietly. "Did he know about Mr. Wheeler?" Martinez was already pulling up personnel files on his computer. His eyes widened as he read. "Listen to this. Master Sergeant Turner, David J., served in Vietnam, 1968, assigned to..." He paused, his voice dropping. "Assigned to the medevac unit at Khe Sanh. He was one of the wounded Marines in the helicopter that day. One of the men Wheeler saved." Ramirez let out a low whistle. "His own grandson spat on the man who saved his grandfather's life. He might not know," Cooper suggested. "The Master Sergeant was pretty private about his service toward the end. And from what the VFW guys tell me, Jacob had a falling out with his grandfather before he died. Started hanging out with an anti-military crowd in college." Martinez stood, decision made. "All right, we've got our man. But we handle this carefully. Wheeler was clear. This isn't about revenge. It's about education, about making things right." He turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Mitchell, can you reach out to local media contacts? They'll want this story, but we need to control how it comes out." "Already ahead of you," she replied. "Channel 5 is very interested, especially given the viral video. They want to do a piece on veteran respect and community values." "Good. Cooper, reach out to your contacts at the VFW. See if anyone knows where we can find young Turner. Ramirez, keep monitoring social media. If Turner's posted anything about the incident, we need to know." The team dispersed to their tasks, but Martinez remained at his desk, studying the personnel files. There was something here, a connection spanning generations, a story of service and sacrifice that had somehow turned bitter in the telling. His phone buzzed. A text from Wheeler. "Found something you should see. Can you come by?" Martinez grabbed his cover, heading for the door. In the hallway, he passed a wall of photographs, generations of Marines who had served at the base. Master Sergeant Turner's photo was there, young and proud in his dress blues. Next to it, a grainy photograph from Vietnam showed a group of Marines being loaded onto a medevac helicopter. He paused, studying the image. In the background, barely visible through the jungle haze, a lone figure could be seen running toward the helicopter, weapon raised. Though the photo was old and unclear, Martinez knew without doubt who that figure was. The past wasn't just history, it was alive, breathing, connecting people in ways they didn't even understand. As he walked to his car, Martinez's mind was already working on how to bridge the gap between a young man's anger and the truth about what had happened on a distant hillside in Vietnam. The answer, he suspected, was waiting at Wheeler's house. Some stories needed to be told, some wounds needed to be healed, and some bridges needed to be rebuilt. That's what Marines did. They fixed things, they made things right, and they never, ever left anyone behind, not even the lost grandson of a brother Marine. By midday, the town of Hamilton was buzzing with tension. The video of Wheeler's humiliation had spread far beyond local social media, drawing battle lines through the community. Outside the courthouse, a small group of veterans had gathered, their presence both silent and powerful. Across the street, a handful of younger protesters held signs denouncing military glorification. Charlie's coffee shop had become an unexpected headquarters for those supporting Wheeler. The owner had placed a handwritten sign in the window, "Veterans drink free today." Inside, the usual quiet atmosphere had been replaced by intense discussions and occasional arguments. "I was there," a middle-aged woman was telling anyone who would listen. "I watched it happen and did nothing. Her voice cracked with shame. "My own father served in Vietnam. What would he think of me?" At another table, a group of college students huddled over laptops, arguing about historical context and modern military politics. Their professor, Dr. Helen Martinez, no relation to the staff sergeant, tried to guide the discussion toward understanding rather than judgment. "Think about what this moment represents," she urged her students. "It's not just about one veteran, one act of disrespect. It's about how we, as a society, process our military history, our obligations to those who served." The local newspaper's editor, Tom Bradford, sat in his usual corner, furiously typing on his laptop. His morning editorial had already caused a stir. "When we turn away, the cost of collective indifference." The piece didn't just condemn the spitting incident, it challenged the entire town to examine its conscience. "We pride ourselves on being a military town," Bradford had written. "We wave flags on Memorial Day, applaud at parades, and paste 'Support our troops' stickers on our cars. But yesterday, when real respect was demanded of us, we failed. We turned away, and in doing so, we became complicit in something shameful." Outside the coffee shop, Sarah Mitchell was giving an interview to Channel 5 News. She spoke with careful precision, aware that her words would reach far beyond their local community. "This isn't about choosing sides," she explained to the reporter. "It's about recognizing that we have heroes walking among us, heroes who never asked for recognition, who carried their burden quietly. And yesterday we let one of them down." The reporter, sensing a bigger story, pressed for details. "We understand the veteran in question has a rather remarkable military record," Sarah smiled diplomatically. "That's not my story to tell, but I will say this. Sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who never seek the spotlight." Across town at the VFW Hall, the atmosphere was tense. Vietnam veterans in particular were taking the incident personally. Many had experienced similar treatment upon returning home decades ago. But to see it happening now, in 2025, to one of their own. "I know the Turner kid," Bob Wilson, a former Army sergeant, told the group. "Used to see him with his grandfather all the time at our events. David was so proud of him, always talking about how Jacob would carry on the family's military tradition." "What changed?" someone asked. Wilson shook his head. College, maybe. New friends. Started coming around with different ideas. David, and he had some fierce arguments near the end. About the military. About America's role in the world. Broke the old man's heart. The VFW commander, retired Major James Collins, called for attention. Listen up, people. I just got off the phone with Staff Sergeant Martinez from the base. They're handling this situation, and they've asked for our cooperation. No vigilante justice, no confrontations. We're going to do this the right way. A younger veteran stood up. But sir, we can't just let this slide. The video's everywhere. People are watching to see how we respond. And we will respond, Collins assured him. But we're going to do it with the same honor and dignity that Mr. Wheeler showed yesterday. That's what sets us apart. That's what makes us who we are. The discussion continued, but the mood had shifted. The initial anger was being channeled into something more constructive, more purposeful. Plans were being made, not for retaliation, but for education, for community outreach, for bridge building. Back at Charlie's, the bell above the door chimed as Staff Sergeant Martinez entered. The conversations hushed as he made his way to the counter. Charlie himself came out to serve him. "How's Mr. Wheeler doing?" Charlie asked quietly. Martinez accepted the offered coffee. "He's strong, stronger than any of us knew, and he's about to make this town remember something it should never have forgotten." The coffee shop had fallen silent, everyone straining to hear. Martinez turned to face the room, his voice carrying clearly. "Tomorrow morning, Mr. Wheeler will tell his story, the real story, and after that," he paused, making eye contact with various patrons, "after that, this town needs to decide who it really is and what it truly stands for." The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation. Outside, the protesters and counter-protesters continued their vigil, each side convinced of their righteousness. But inside Charlie's coffee shop, something else was brewing, the slow, steady realization that this moment could either tear their community apart or bind it together in ways they had never expected. Jacob Turner sat alone in his small apartment, staring at his phone as the video of his actions played on repeat. His social media notifications had exploded, a mix of support from his anti-war activist friends and vitriolic condemnation from everyone else. The tattoo on his forearm, his grandfather's Marine Corps unit number stylized into abstract art, seemed to burn with accusation. He'd been drunk when he did it, not fall-down drunk, but enough to fuel the anger that had been simmering since his grandfather's death 3 years ago. The sight of that old veteran standing so proudly with his medals had triggered something dark and unresolved inside him. "You don't understand," he muttered, typing another defensive response to a comment. "None of you understand." His laptop screen showed open tabs of research he'd been doing since yesterday: Vietnam War, Khe Sanh, Silver Star recipients. The more he read, the more a sick feeling grew in his stomach. The metal he'd spat on. It wasn't just any metal. A knock at his door made him jump. Through the peephole he saw his mother, Catherine Turner, standing in the hallway. Her face showed the strain of the past 24 hours. "I know you're in there, Jacob," she called softly. "Please, we need to talk." He opened the door reluctantly. Catherine entered carrying a worn cardboard box he recognized from his grandfather's study. She set it on his cluttered coffee table. "You never read these," she said, opening the box. "After you and Pop had your falling out, you refused to look at anything he tried to show you." She pulled out a stack of letters, yellowed with age. "These are from Vietnam. He wrote them to your grandmother." Jacob sat heavily on his couch. "Mom, I don't need—" "Yes, you do." Her voice was firm. "You need to understand what you did yesterday, who you did it to." She selected one letter, dated February 1968. "This one, read it." With trembling hands, Jacob unfolded the paper. "My dearest Mary, they told me I'm going home next week. The doctors say I'll walk again, maybe even run. But that's not what I need to tell you about. I need to tell you about the Marine who saved my life, saved all our lives, on Hill 881. We were trapped in that chopper, me and 7 others. 2 critically wounded. The NVA had us pinned down. We could hear them getting closer. The radio was dead. We thought that was it. Then we heard the firefight. Through the fog, I saw this Marine running toward us, running straight into enemy fire like something out of a movie. But this wasn't a movie. This was Sergeant Wheeler, and he was real. For 6 hours, he and his men held off an entire enemy company. When they ran out of ammo, they fought hand to hand. Wheeler himself got hit 3 times but wouldn't stop fighting. He kept saying, "No one dies today, not on my watch. Mary, I've seen brave men in this war." But what Wheeler did, that was something else. That was the kind of courage you can't explain. The kind that makes you believe in humanity again. When they finally evacuated us, Wheeler was still standing, still firing, still protecting us. They tell me he's being put in for the Silver Star. It's not enough. There isn't a medal big enough. For what he did that day, I know when I get home, things will be different. War changes you. But because of Wheeler, I'll be there to see our son grow up, to see our family continue. Some debts you can never repay. Jacob's hands were shaking so badly he could barely read the last lines. His mother sat beside him, her own eyes wet with tears. "Your grandfather tried to tell you this story so many times," she said quietly. "But you were so angry, so convinced that all soldiers were warmongers, that you wouldn't listen. Why didn't you tell me yesterday?" Jacob's voice cracked. "When you saw the video? Would you have listened?" She pulled another item from the box, a photograph. It showed his grandfather in a hospital bed, young and bandaged, smiling weakly. At the camera, behind him stood a younger version of the man Jacob had spat on yesterday. "Your grandfather kept track of him over the years," Catherine continued. "Wheeler moved to Hamilton about 10 years ago. Pop tried to reconnect, but Wheeler was private, didn't want attention. 'Just let me be,' he told Pop. 'The past is past.'" Jacob stared at the photo, at the face of the man he'd so casually disrespected. "What have I done, Mom?" "Something terrible," she agreed. "But maybe something that can be fixed, if you're brave enough to try." Outside his apartment window, the sun was setting on another day in Hamilton. Somewhere out there was a man who had saved his grandfather's life, who had made his own existence possible. A man he had thanked with contempt and saliva. Jacob stood up. Decision made. I need to find him. I need to make this right. His mother nodded, hope flickering in her eyes. "It won't be easy." "Neither was running across 50 yards of open ground under enemy fire," Jacob replied, the full weight of his actions finally hitting him. "But he did that for Pop. I can do this for both of them." The evening air was heavy with approaching rain as Wheeler sat in his study, surrounded by the artifacts of his past. He'd spent the afternoon pulling out boxes he hadn't opened in years, each one containing pieces of a life he'd tried to leave behind. The reason for this excavation of memories lay on his desk, a worn leather journal he'd kept during his time in Vietnam. Staff Sergeant Martinez sat across from him, watching respectfully as the older Marine carefully turned the pages. The journal's entries, written in precise military shorthand, told stories that had never made it into official reports. "Found this while going through everything," Wheeler said, his voice distant. "Been avoiding it for decades. Funny how yesterday made me want to look at it again." He paused at a particular page, the paper wrinkled from what might have been old water damage or tears. "This is about David Turner." Martinez leaned forward slightly. "Master Sergeant Turner, sir?" Wheeler nodded, beginning to read. "April 15, 1968. Turner's improving. Docs say he'll walk again. Visited him in the field hospital today. Kid couldn't stop thanking me, but he's got it wrong. He's the one who saved us all that day." "Sir?" Martinez's confusion was evident. Wheeler looked up, his eyes sharp with remembered clarity. "Everyone focuses on what I did running to that chopper, but they don't know about Turner. He was the most badly wounded, had taken shrapnel in both legs. But when we ran out of ammunition, he dragged himself to each of the wounded men, keeping their spirits up, helping them load magazines with loose rounds he collected from his stretcher." He turned another page. "The citation mentions me holding off the NVA for 6 hours. Doesn't mention that Turner, despite his injuries, used his belt as a tourniquet at another Marine, then talked that same Marine through the shock, kept him alive through sheer force of will." Martinez watched as Wheeler stood, moving to a shelf, where a single framed photograph stood apart from the others. It showed two men, much younger, in hospital gowns, grinning despite their bandages. "Turner visited me while I was recovering from my wounds," Wheeler continued. "Told me his wife was pregnant with their first child, a boy. Said he was going to raise him to understand what brotherhood really means." He placed the photo back, carefully. "I wonder what he'd think now, seeing his grandson spit on his brother Marine." The room fell silent except for the distant rumble of thunder. Martinez cleared his throat. "Sir, about Jacob Turner, I know what you're going to say, Staff Sergeant. You found him." "Yes, sir, he's not what we expected. His mother brought him some letters today. Letters from his grandfather. About you, about that day." Wheeler's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "And? He wants to meet you, sir? To apologize? To understand?" Moving to the window, Wheeler watched the first raindrops fall. "You know, after Turner recovered, he made me promise something. Said, if anything ever happened to him, I'd look out for his family. Make sure they understood what we fought for, what we stood for." He turned back to Martinez. "I failed him. Got so caught up in my own memories, my own need for quiet, that I let his grandson lose his way. That boy's anger yesterday, that's partly on me. Sir, with respect, you can't—" "I can, Staff Sergeant, and I do." Wheeler returned to his desk, picking up another photograph, this one showing David Turner in his dress blues, holding his infant grandson. "Brotherhood doesn't end when the fighting stops. It doesn't end when we take off the uniform, and it sure as hell doesn't end when we die." Thunder crashed closer now, the rain falling in earnest. Wheeler's voice took on a tone of command that Martinez recognized from the stories, the voice that had led men through hell on Hill 881. "Turner's grandson needs to understand not just what happened that day, but why it mattered, why it still matters, and he needs to hear it from me." He looked at Martinez. "You've done good work, Staff Sergeant. Now, let me do mine." Martinez stood, recognizing the dismissal. At the door, he paused. "Sir, the town's planning something, a ceremony. They want to make this right." Wheeler waved his hand dismissively. "I don't need ceremonies." "No, sir, but maybe the town does, maybe Jacob Turner does, maybe we all do." After Martinez left, Wheeler sat alone in his study, surrounded by the ghosts of his past. He opened the journal one more time to an entry he'd written the day after the rescue. "Some debts can never be repaid, some bonds can never be broken, and some promises must never be forgotten." Outside, the storm grew stronger, but inside Wheeler's study, a different kind of storm was brewing, one of memory, duty, and the eternal bonds of brotherhood that transcended generations. Tomorrow he would meet David Turner's grandson. Tomorrow he would fulfill a promise made half a century ago in a hospital room half a world away. Some battles, Wheeler knew, were fought not with bullets and grenades, but with wisdom, forgiveness, and the unwavering loyalty of one Marine to another, even across the depths of time and tragedy. The meeting was arranged for neutral ground, Charlie's coffee shop, early morning before the regular crowd. Charlie had agreed to open an hour early, understanding the gravity of what was about to unfold. He'd set up a quiet corner away from windows where privacy could be maintained. Jacob Turner arrived first, 20 minutes early, his mother waiting supportively in her car across the street. His hand shook as he sipped water, the coffee Charlie had offered left untouched. He'd dressed carefully, pressed shirt, clean-shaven, his grandfather's Marine Corps tie pin on his collar. The tattoo on his forearm, usually a point of pride, felt like a brand of shame. Wheeler entered exactly on time, moving with the same measured dignity he'd shown at the parade. He carried a weathered leather briefcase, its scratches and worn edges telling stories of decades of use. Martinez and Cooper flanked him, more out of respect than security, while Ramirez stayed by the door. The old Marine's eyes found Jacob immediately. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Charlie busied himself in the kitchen, the clatter of cups, providing cover for this delicate moment. "Mr. Wheeler," Jacob finally managed, standing awkwardly, "I thank you for agreeing to meet me." Wheeler studied the young man's face, seeing echoes of his old friend David. "Sit down, son," he said quietly. "We have a lot to talk about." As they settled, Martinez and Cooper withdrew to a discreet distance, close enough to observe, far enough to give privacy. Wheeler opened his briefcase, removing the journal and photographs he'd shown Martinez the night before. "Your grandfather," Wheeler began, his voice steady, "was one of the finest Marines I ever knew." He placed the hospital photograph on the table. This was taken 2 weeks after Hill 881. The doctors had just told him he might never walk again. Jacob stared at the image, at his grandfather's young face, smiling through pain. "Mom showed me his letters yesterday, about what you did, about how you saved them." "No." Wheeler's response was sharp, surprising Jacob. "That's not the whole truth. And it's time you knew it." He opened the journal, finding the page he'd marked. "Your grandfather saved just as many lives that day as I did. Different way, but just as important." Over the next hour, Wheeler shared the real story of Hill 881, not the sanitized version from citations and news articles, but the raw truth from his journal. He told Jacob about his grandfather's courage, about how David Turner, despite devastating injuries, had become the heart of their resistance. When men were ready to give up, your grandfather kept them going, when fear threatened to overwhelm. Us, he cracked jokes. When we ran out of ammunition, he taught us to use our voices as weapons, calling out encouragement, maintaining our humanity in the face of hell. Jacob's coffee grew cold as he listened, tears running freely down his face. Wheeler's voice never wavered as he described the final hours of the siege, when David Turner, barely conscious from blood loss, had sung the Marine Corps hymn to keep a dying comrade fighting for life. "That man lived," Wheeler said softly. "Made it home to his family, had children, grandchildren, all because your grandfather refused to let death win that day." "I never knew," Jacob whispered. "He tried to tell me, but I wouldn't listen. I was so angry about everything, about war, about politics, about him pushing me to enlist." You thought he was glorifying war," Wheeler finished. "But David never glorified war. He glorified brotherhood. There's a difference." Wheeler pulled out one final item, a folded piece of paper, its creases deep from years of handling. "Your grandfather wrote this to me 2 weeks before he died. Asked me to give it to you when the time was right." He slid it across the table. "I failed him in that. Should have found you sooner, should have made you understand." Jacob's hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. His grandfather's familiar handwriting, shakier than in the Vietnam letters, but still distinct, filled the page. "Dear Jacob, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're finally ready to understand. The man giving you this letter is more than my brother Marine. He's the reason you exist, the reason I came home to have a family, the reason you have the luxury of choosing your own path. I never wanted you to be a Marine because of tradition or obligation. I wanted it because I saw in you the same fire, the same capacity for brotherhood that I witnessed on Hill 881. But that fire can warm or burn, build or destroy. The choice was always yours. Whatever you decide, remember this. True strength isn't in winning fights, but in standing up for what's right. It's not in the medals we wear, but in the promises we keep. And it's not in the battles we fight, but in the brothers we protect. Wheeler knows this better than anyone. Learn from him what you wouldn't learn from me." With eternal love, Pop, the coffee shop had grown absolutely still. Even Charlie had stopped pretending to work, standing silently behind his counter. Outside, the morning sun broke through early clouds, casting long shadows through the windows. Jacob looked up from the letter to find Wheeler watching him with eyes that had seen too much and understood even more. "I don't deserve forgiveness," Jacob said hoarsely. "No," Wheeler agreed. "You have to earn it, just like we earned everything we got on that hill. The question is, are you ready to start?" That night, Wheeler couldn't sleep. The meeting with Jacob Turner had stirred something deep within him, bringing long-buried memories to the surface. He sat in his darkened living room, the streetlights casting strange shadows through his window. David Turner's last letter spread out before him, His own copy, received just days before his old friend's death. "Tom, watch over him," David had written. "He's lost his way, but the boy I knew was still in there. The one who used to sit on my lap and ask about my medals. The one who cried when he first learned what sacrifice meant." A knock at his door startled him from his thoughts. Through the people, he saw Martinez standing on his porch, still in uniform despite the late hour. "Sorry to disturb you, sir," Martinez said when Wheeler opened the door, "but there's something you need to see." Wheeler followed Martinez to his car. The staff sergeant opened his laptop, pulling up various social media sites and local news. Pages. The story had exploded. Not just the incident at the parade, but everything. Hill 881, the rescue, the connection between Wheeler and the Turners. "Someone leaked the details," Martinez explained. "We think it was one of the veterans at the VFW who knew the whole story. It's gone viral. National news is picking it up." Wheeler scanned the headlines. "Hero Marine forgives grandson of man. He saved. Vietnam valor comes full circle. A story of redemption when past meets present." The comment sections were flooded with responses, many from veterans sharing their own stories of brotherhood and reconciliation. "That's not all, sir." Martinez switched to another tab. "Jacob Turner posted this an hour ago." The video started playing. Jacob sitting in what looked like his apartment, speaking directly to the camera. His eyes were red, his voice raw. With emotion, "My name is Jacob Turner. Yesterday I committed an act of profound disrespect against a Marine Corps veteran. What I didn't know, what I refused to know, was that this man, Thomas Wheeler, saved my grandfather's life in Vietnam. Without his courage, his sacrifice, I wouldn't exist." Jacob's voice broke slightly, "But it's more than that. Today, I learned what true strength looks like, not in medals or combat, but in forgiveness, in the quiet dignity of a man who had every right to hate me, but chose to teach me instead." The video continued, Jacob sharing what he'd learned about his grandfather, about Wheeler, about the brotherhood that had sustained them through hell. He ended with a plea to every veteran watching this, every service member, every family who's sacrificed, "I am deeply sorry. Not just for what I did, but for what my actions represent. The disrespect, the ingratitude, the failure to understand. I can't undo what I did, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." Wheeler watched in silence as Martinez showed him more responses pouring in. Veterans sharing similar stories of misunderstanding and reconciliation. Young people admitting their own prejudices and vowing to learn. Gold Star families offering forgiveness and understanding. "It's bigger than just you and Jacob now, sir," Martinez said quietly. "It's becoming something else, something the country seems to need." Wheeler stood, walking to his window. Across the street, a neighbor had put out an American flag, not for any holiday, but in response to the story. Further down, he could see more flags appearing, like stars emerging in an evening sky. "I never wanted attention," Wheeler said, his voice distant. "Never wanted recognition. The men who died that day, they're the ones who deserve to be remembered, and they will be, sir. Through this. Through you." Martinez joined him at the window. "Sometimes the best way to honor the fallen is to help the living understand what they died for." Wheeler thought of David Turner, of the promise he'd made in that hospital room half a century ago. Of all the promises made between brothers in arms, promises that transcended death, time, and even betrayal. "Jacob wants to make it right," Martinez continued. "The town's planning a ceremony, not just for you, for all of them, for every veteran who's felt forgotten, every family who's sacrificed, every story that needs to be told." In the distance, thunder rolled. Another spring storm approaching. Wheeler remembered another storm, on a hillside far away and long ago, where brotherhood had proven stronger than fear, stronger than pain, stronger even than death itself. "David's letter," Wheeler said finally, turning back to his desk. "He wrote something else, something I've been thinking about all day." He picked up the weathered paper, reading, "Sometimes, Tom, the greatest act of courage isn't charging into fire. It's opening your heart when every scar tells you to keep it. Closed. Martinez waited, understanding the weight of this moment. Call Jacob, Wheeler said finally. Tell him I have more stories to share, about his grandfather, about all of them. It's time these stories were told. Outside, the first raindrops began to fall, but inside Wheeler's home, something else was falling. The walls he'd built around his memories, around his heart. Sometimes, he realized, the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons, but with wisdom. And sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating an enemy, but from turning one into family. The town hall was packed beyond capacity, with people spilling out into the corridors and onto the steps outside. Mayor Patricia Chen had called an emergency community meeting, but what was unfolding felt more like a movement. Veterans sat alongside. College students who had protested military involvement just days before. Families of active service members mingled with local business owners. Even the media had been asked to wait outside. This was for the community first. We're here today, Mayor Chen began, because our town experienced something that shook us to our core. Not just the act itself, but our collective response to it, our silence, our inaction. But what started as a moment of shame has become an opportunity for transformation. Sarah Mitchell stood next to Jacob Turner at the podium, both ready to present their proposal. The past 3 days had seen them working tirelessly together, turning an idea into a concrete plan. Jacob, still wearing his grandfather's tie pin, looked both nervous and determined. The Hamilton Veterans Heritage Project, Sarah announced, unveiling a rendered design on the projection screen. A living memorial, not just to past conflicts, but to the ongoing story of service, sacrifice, and understanding. Jacob stepped forward, his voice steady despite his obvious emotion. The project has 3 components. First, a permanent exhibition space in the renovated west wing of the library, where veterans can share their stories through recordings, letters, and artifacts. Second, an educational program connecting veterans with local schools and colleges. And third, a community outreach initiative ensuring no veteran in Hamilton ever feels forgotten or isolated again. The room erupted in discussion. Questions flew from all corners. How would it be funded? Who would manage it? How could people help? Charlie raised his hand from the back. My coffee shop pledges free coffee for life to any veteran who shares their story for the project. This sparked a wave of similar offers from other business owners. Discounts, services, support of all kinds. Dr. Helen Martinez, the college professor who had been leading discussions with her students, stood up. My students want to help document these stories. We have filmmakers, writers, historians, all willing to volunteer their time. The energy in the room was electric, but it was the next speaker who brought everything into focus. Thomas Wheeler, who had been sitting quietly in the back with Martinez and his fellow Marines, made his way to the podium. The room fell silent. 3 days ago, he began, his voice carrying clearly, I stood on a street corner and felt the weight of invisibility, not just my own, but the invisibility of every veteran who ever came home to find the world had moved on without understanding what they'd sacrificed to protect it. He paused, looking around the room. But invisibility works both ways. While you couldn't see us, we also couldn't see you. Your desire to understand, your capacity for growth, your willingness to make things right. Wheeler pulled out his worn journal. These pages hold stories that need to be told, not just mine. Every veteran has similar pages, whether written down or carried in their hearts. Stories of courage, yes, but more importantly, stories of brotherhood, of promises kept, of love that transcends battlefield and time. He turned to Jacob. Young Mr. Turner's action sparked something, not what he intended, but perhaps what we all needed. A reminder that understanding doesn't come through speeches or parades, but through stories shared and heard, through connections made and renewed. The mayor stepped forward again. We've received preliminary approval for funding from the city council. The library board has unanimously approved the space allocation, but we need something else. We need your stories." Hands began raising across the room. A Vietnam veteran in a wheelchair. "I've got boxes of letters in my attic. A Gulf War nurse. I kept a diary every day of my deployment. An Iraq War veteran. My unit's been looking for a way to reconnect, to share what we experienced." Sarah returned to the podium, unveiling the project's timeline. "We want to break ground next month, but the real work begins today. We need volunteers. For committees, for outreach, for organization." The sign-up sheets filled so quickly, they had to print more. Working groups formed spontaneously in corners of the room. Veterans who had been strangers minutes before were exchanging phone numbers, making plans to share their stories. Wheeler watched it all from the side of the room, Martinez standing respectfully beside him. "Never expected anything like this," the older Marine said quietly. "That's the thing about truth, sir," Martinez replied. "Once it starts flowing, it tends to flood." Outside, the evening was settling over Hamilton. The media crews were packing up, but the real story was still unfolding inside, in the connections being made, the barriers being broken, the understanding being built. Tomorrow, there would be work to do. Committees to form, funds to raise, stories to record. But tonight, in this room, something profound was already happening. A town was remembering not just its heroes, but its heart, and in that remembering, both the visible and invisible wounds of the past were beginning to heal. The ceremony was set for Saturday morning in the town square. What had started as a simple apology had grown into something far more significant. The plaza was filled beyond capacity, with people spilling onto adjacent streets. Veterans from across the state had arrived, drawn by the viral story and its deeper meaning. Local news crews set up their equipment while national media hovered at the edges, sensing something profound was about to unfold. Wheeler stood backstage in the temporary pavilion, adjusting his dress blues, the first time he'd worn them in over a decade. Each medal felt heavier than he remembered, especially the Silver Star that had started it all. Martinez helped him with his collar, the younger Marine's movements precise and respectful. "Packed house out there, sir," Martinez reported. "Every veterans organization in the state sent representatives. 3 Medal of Honor recipients in attendance." Wheeler nodded, his expression unreadable. "And Turner, waiting in the side tent." "Sir, says he's ready whenever you are." The old Marine turned to a small mirror, checking his appearance one final time. The face that looked back at him had aged, but the eyes remained the same, clear, determined, carrying the weight of memories and promises. "You know," Wheeler said quietly, "David Turner once told me that the hardest part of coming home wasn't dealing with the wounds or the nightmares. It was trying to explain to people who hadn't been there what it all meant. Why we did what we did." He touched the silver star on his chest. "Maybe that's what this is really about. Not just one incident, one moment of disrespect, but about bridging that gap of understanding." Outside, the crowd had fallen silent as Mayor Chen approached the podium. Her voice carried clearly through the morning air. "We gather today not just to right a wrong, but to remember a truth, that the bonds of service, sacrifice, and brotherhood transcend time, transcend generations, and have the power to heal even the deepest wounds." Wheeler moved toward the stage entrance, then paused. "Martinez." "Sir?" "Whatever happens next, thank you for reminding an old Marine that some battles are worth fighting in the open," the mayor's voice continued. 2 men will stand before you today. One carried the weight of service and sacrifice in silence for decades. The other carried the weight of misunderstanding and misdirected anger. But today, they stand together, showing us that redemption is possible, that understanding can triumph over ignorance, that the bridges we think are burned can be rebuilt. Jacob Turner emerged from the side tent, wearing a suit with his grandfather's Marine Corps tie pin prominently displayed. His hands were shaking slightly, but his steps were firm as he approached the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mayor Chen announced, "please welcome Thomas Wheeler, Silver Star recipient, and Jacob Turner, grandson of Master Sergeant David Turner." The applause was thunderous as Wheeler mounted the steps. Veterans in the crowd snapped to attention, rendering salutes that the old Marine returned with precision. Jacob stood at the podium waiting. When Wheeler reached him, the younger man spoke first, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "Sergeant Wheeler, 3 days ago, I committed an act of disrespect that shamed not just myself, but the memory of my grandfather and everything he stood for." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a carefully folded handkerchief, the same one Wheeler had used to wipe his jacket at the parade. "This belongs to you. I had it cleaned, but the stain of what I did, the dishonor I brought, that can't be wiped away so easily." Wheeler took the handkerchief, studying it for a moment before speaking. "Son, your grandfather taught me something. On Hill 881, he said that true courage isn't about never making mistakes, it's about facing them head-on when you do." The old Marine turned to address the crowd, his voice strong and clear. "Many of you have seen the video of what happened at the parade. You've heard the story of Hill 881, of how I helped save David Turner and his fellow Marines. But that's not the whole truth." He placed a hand on Jacob's shoulder. "David Turner saved us that day too. Through his courage, his spirit, his unbreakable will to live, he taught us that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with heart. Not with hatred, but with hope." Tears were flowing freely in the crowd now. Veterans nodded in understanding, while civilians began to grasp the deeper meaning unfolding before them. "Jacob," Wheeler continued, "your grandfather would be proud of you today, not because you made a mistake, but because you had the courage to make it right. And in doing so, you've helped us all remember something vital, that the story of service and sacrifice isn't just about the past. It's about how we choose to honor it in the present." The two men faced each other, the weight of history, guilt, and redemption hanging between them. Then Wheeler did something that made the crowd gasp. He unpinned his silver star and held it out to Jacob. "This belongs to your family as much as it belongs to me. Your grandfather earned it just as surely as I did. Let it be a reminder not of what was lost, but of what can be found when we choose understanding over anger, redemption over revenge." The crowd stood in stunned silence as Jacob Turner stared at the silver star in Wheeler's outstretched hand. The morning sun caught the metal surface, sending ribbons of light across the young man's tears. I can't accept this, sir." Jacob's voice cracked. "I haven't earned it. None of us earn it alone," Wheeler replied, his voice carrying across the silent square. "Every medal, every honor represents a web of sacrifice and brotherhood that spans generations." He turned to address the crowd, the star still extended. "You want to know the real story of Hill 881? The whole truth? Then listen carefully." Wheeler's voice took on the timbre of command, the same tone that had carried across battlefield chaos decades ago. "Everyone knows about the rescue, about the 6-hour defense of the downed helicopter, but nobody knows about Private James Chen, 19 years old, who held a severed radio antenna together with his bare hands, taking enemy fire so we could call for support." In the crowd, an elderly Asian woman covered her mouth, tears streaming. Down her face, her son, standing beside her in a Marine uniform, held her shoulders. Nobody knows about Corporal Michael Rodriguez, who used his own body to shield 2 wounded men when we ran out of cover, or about Lance Corporal William O'Brien, who sang Irish ballads during the firefight to keep our spirits up, even after taking shrapnel in his leg. Wheeler's voice grew stronger, each name carrying the weight of half a century's remembrance. "And David Turner, everyone talks about how I saved him, but they don't know how he saved us all. With both legs shattered, he became our heart, our conscience, our unbreakable spirit. When ammunition ran low, he tore strips from his own uniform to help pack wounds. When men started losing hope, he reminded them of their families, their promises to return home." The old Marine turned back to Jacob. "Your grandfather taught me the most important lesson of war that day, that medals don't make heroes. Brotherhood does, sacrifice does, love does. From the front row, Martinez stepped forward, carrying a large leather portfolio. Wheeler nodded, and the staff sergeant began distributing photographs and documents to the media representatives. Images that had never been seen before, papers that told the fuller story. Hill 881 wasn't one man's victory, Wheeler continued. It was a testament to what humans can achieve when they fight not for glory, but for each other. Every Marine there that day earned this star. Every family that waited at home earned it. Every community that lost sons and gained heroes earned it. He pressed the medal into Jacob's trembling hands. Your grandfather made me promise to look after his family. I failed in that duty once, letting you lose your way. I won't fail again. This medal belongs with you, not as a symbol of war or violence, but as a reminder of what real strength looks like, what real brotherhood means. Jacob stared at the medal, then looked up at Wheeler with new understanding. The stories? He said, his voice carrying in the silence. All those stories Pop tried to tell me, I thought they were about glory and killing, but they weren't, were they? They were about love. The deepest kind, Wheeler nodded. The kind that makes a man run through fire to save his brothers. The kind that keeps another man singing while his life bleeds out, just to give hope to others. The kind that lets a father forgive his grandson's worst mistake. From the crowd, Catherine Turner emerged, carrying an old box that everyone recognized from the coffee shop meeting. Mom? Jacob asked, confused. There's more, she said, her voice strong despite her tears. Show them, Mr. Wheeler. Show them what Dad left for this moment. Wheeler opened the box, removing a stack of letters and a small recording device. Your grandfather didn't just write letters from Vietnam, he explained. He recorded messages for his family, messages that were meant for a day like this. He pressed play, and David Turner's voice, young, strong, filled with the conviction of a Marine in his prime, floated across the square. If you're hearing this, it means something has brought our family back to the brotherhood I knew. On Hill 881, Tom Wheeler didn't just save my life that day. He showed me what it means to live for something bigger than yourself, to fight not for glory or country, but for the man next to you, for the future he represents. The recording continued, David Turner's voice painting pictures of heroism, sacrifice, and a love that transcended battlefield horror. In the crowd, veterans stood straighter, civilians wiped tears, and a new understanding began to dawn. That the true cost of war isn't measured in victories or defeats, but in the bonds forged and lessons learned. Wheeler watched as Jacob held the silver star up to the morning light, seeing it not as a symbol of military prowess, but as a testament to the enduring power of brotherhood, forgiveness, and the kind of love that turns strangers into family and enemies into brothers. The story of Hill 881 was finally being told in full. Not as a tale of one hero, but as a testament to the extraordinary capacity of ordinary humans to rise above themselves when brotherhood demands it. The days following the ceremony brought changes to Hamilton that nobody could have predicted. The story had touched something deep in the national consciousness, spreading far beyond the confines of their small town. But it was within Hamilton itself that the most profound transformations were taking place. Charlie's Coffee Shop had become an unofficial headquarters for the Veterans Storytelling Project. The owner had cleared his back room, setting up recording equipment donated by the local radio station. Veterans would come in, some reluctant at first, but Wheeler's example had opened a floodgate of memories and experiences that needed to be shared. Never thought I'd tell anyone about that night in Fallujah, a young Iraq War veteran said, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Figured nobody would understand. But after hearing Wheeler's story, after seeing how sharing the truth can heal, he looked up at Jacob, who had taken to spending his afternoons helping with the recordings. Maybe it's time we all stopped carrying these burdens alone. Jacob had transformed as well. Gone was the angry young man who had spat on a hero. In his place was someone dedicated to understanding, to bridging the gap between veterans and civilians. He wore his grandfather's tie pin every day now, along with Wheeler's Silver Star on special occasions, each item a reminder of the legacy he was now committed to preserving. At the local high school, Wheeler himself had become a regular visitor, though not in the way anyone expected. He didn't come to tell war stories or recruit for the military. Instead, he taught lessons about brotherhood, about the quiet heroism of standing up for others, about the kind of love that transcends battlefield lines. Combat isn't the point, he told a packed auditorium. The medals aren't the point. What matters is how we treat each other, how we honor the sacrifices made by standing up for what's right. Here and now, in our own communities, the Hamilton Veterans Heritage Project was taking shape faster than anyone had anticipated. Local businesses had donated materials and labor. The library's West Wing was undergoing renovation, its walls already lined with photographs and letters. But it was the oral histories that proved most powerful. Veterans from World War II to Afghanistan sharing their stories, not of combat, but of brotherhood. Sarah Mitchell had received word that her husband's unit overseas had heard about the project. They were recording their own stories, creating a bridge between past and present, between those who served and those who waited at home. The scope of the project was expanding beyond anything they had initially imagined. One afternoon, Wheeler found himself back at the parade route where everything had started. The spot where he had stood, where Jacob had confronted him, was now marked with a small plaque, not commemorating the incident itself, but celebrating the healing that had followed. Martinez joined him there, both men standing in comfortable silence before the marker. "Did you ever imagine, sir," Martinez asked, "that one moment of disrespect could lead to all this?" Wheeler touched the empty spot on his chest where the Silver Star had rested for so many years. David Turner used to say that sometimes the worst moments can bring out the best in people. Just took me a while to understand what he meant. Across the street, they could see Jacob leading a group of students toward the library. He had started a program connecting young people with veterans, not to glorify war, but to understand the human stories behind the uniforms. "You know what's remarkable?" Wheeler continued, watching the group. "It's not just veterans sharing their stories now. It's their families too. Wives, children, parents, all those people who served in their own way, carrying their own burdens of sacrifice and pride." The town itself seemed different. American flags flew more prominently, not as symbols of blind patriotism, but as reminders of the connections that bound their community together. The VFW Hall had been repainted, its doors now open daily for community events and conversations. Even the college students who had once protested military involvement had found a new perspective. They hadn't abandoned their questioning of policy or their desire for peace, but they had learned to separate the complex politics of war from the very human stories of those who served. "Staff Sergeant," Wheeler said suddenly, "I need you to do something for me." "Anything, sir." "My journal, all those stories I kept private for so long. I think it's time they were added to the project. Not just Hill 881, but all of it. The good and the bad, the triumph and the loss, the real story of what brotherhood means." Martinez nodded, understanding the significance of this request. Wheeler had been the catalyst for all this change, but he had kept many of his own stories private. This final act of sharing would complete the circle of trust and healing that had begun with a moment of disrespect on a sunny morning in May. As they walked away from the plaque, Wheeler stopped one more time. "You know what David Turner would say about all this?" "What's that, sir?" "He'd say that sometimes it takes a lifetime to understand what we learned in a single day of battle, that the real victory isn't in winning the fight, but in helping others understand why we fought in the first place." 1 month later, Hamilton gathered again in the town square, this time for the official dedication of the Veterans Heritage Center. The renovated library wing had been transformed into something extraordinary, a living testament to service, sacrifice, and understanding. The morning sun filtered through new stained glass windows, each one depicting scenes of brotherhood rather than battle. Wheeler stood at the entrance, dressed in his dress blues, but without the silver star. Instead, he wore a new medal, one created by the town itself, bearing the inscription, "For building bridges of understanding." He wasn't alone. Beside him stood Jacob Turner, also wearing a matching medal, their shared recognition symbolizing the journey they had taken together. "Pretty remarkable," Jacob said quietly, watching the crowds gather. "A month ago, I was the kid who spat on a hero. Now you're the man who helped a whole town remember its heart," Wheeler finished. "Your grandfather would be proud." Inside, the center was a testament to modern technology merged with timeless stories. Interactive displays allowed visitors to hear veterans' oral histories. Walls of photographs showed not just military moments, but the human side of service, soldiers, sharing meals, writing letters, celebrating birthdays in far-off lands. One entire section was dedicated to military families, acknowledging their own forms of service and sacrifice. Mayor Chen approached the podium set up outside the entrance. The crowd, larger even than at the previous ceremony, fell silent. "1 month ago," she began, "we gathered here to witness an act of reconciliation between two men. Today, we gather to celebrate how that single act has transformed our entire community." She gestured to the building behind her. "This center represents more than just our military history. It represents our commitment to understanding each other, to bridging the gaps that divide us, to recognizing that every story of service touches all of us." Sarah Mitchell took the stage next, her husband now home from deployment and standing proudly in the front row. "In the past month, we've recorded over 300 oral histories, not just from veterans, but from nurses who served in field hospitals, from families who waited at home, from children who grew up in the shadow of service." The screen behind her came to life, showing clips from various interviews. A World War II veteran describing how his Japanese-American translator became his best friend. A Vietnam nurse talking about holding the hands of dying soldiers. A modern-day military spouse sharing what it means to maintain strength for their children during deployments. But perhaps the most powerful story, Sarah continued, began right here with an act of disrespect that transformed into an opportunity for understanding. Wheeler and Jacob made their way to the podium together. The older Marine spoke first, his voice strong and clear. "A month ago, I stood before you and shared the story of Hill 881. Today, I want to share something else. What happened afterward. How we carried those memories home, how we struggled to help others understand, how some of us kept silent when we should have spoken." He turned to Jacob. "But sometimes it takes the next generation to show us our own mistakes, to remind us that keeping these stories locked away doesn't protect anyone. It only deepens the divide between those who served and those who wish to understand." Jacob stepped forward, the silver star visible in a display case behind him, part of a larger exhibition about Hill 8081 and the bonds forged there. "My grandfather left me a legacy I didn't understand," he said. "I thought it was about war, about violence, about things I wanted to reject. But thanks to Mr. Wheeler, thanks to all of you, I finally understand what that legacy really means. It's about the courage to face our mistakes, the strength to forgive, the wisdom to learn from those who came before us." Together they unveiled the center's mission statement, carved in bronze beside the entrance, dedicated to the proposition that every veteran has a story worth telling, every family has a sacrifice worth honoring, and every citizen has a role in keeping these memories alive. For in understanding these stories, we understand ourselves. The crowd erupted in applause. But Wheeler wasn't finished. He raised his hand for silence. "There's one more thing," he said. "Something David Turner wrote in his final letter that I've been keeping to myself. But now is the time to share it." He withdrew a folded paper from his pocket, his hand steady as he read, "Tom, when the time comes, and it will come, help them understand that what we did wasn't about glory or victory. It was about love, the kind of love that makes men run through fire for each other, the kind that turns strangers into brothers, the kind that heals wounds, no medicine can touch. That's the story that needs to be told. That's the legacy that needs to live on. Wheeler looked up at the crowd, at the faces of veterans and civilians, young and old, all united in this moment of understanding. Today, we begin telling that story, not just for ourselves, but for every generation to come. Because in the end, that's what this center is really about, ensuring that the bonds of brotherhood, the power of forgiveness, and the strength of love are never forgotten. 3 months after the incident at the parade, Wheeler sat in his familiar corner at Charlie's coffee shop, but he was no longer alone. The booth that had once been his solitary refuge now hosted a weekly gathering that locals had dubbed the Brotherhood Breakfast. Veterans and civilians alike would join him, sharing stories, building bridges, and continuing the work of understanding that had begun with a moment of disrespect and transformed into a movement of reconciliation. Jacob Turner was there this morning, as he was most mornings now. He'd taken a leave of absence from his job to work full-time on the Heritage Center's Youth Outreach Program. The angry young man who had once spat on a hero had become something his grandfather would have recognized: a builder of bridges, a keeper of stories, a protector of legacies. "Got something to show you, Mr. Wheeler," Jacob said, pulling out his laptop. "We finished digitizing the last of Pop's recordings yesterday." He opened a file, and David Turner's voice filled their corner of the coffee shop. Final thoughts for whoever's listening. Maybe my grandson, maybe someone I've never met. Here's what I learned on Hill 801 and all the days after. The greatest battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought with courage, with understanding, and most of all, with love. Tom Wheeler taught me that. Now it's your turn to teach someone else. Wheeler smiled, remembering his old friend's voice. Around them, the coffee shop hummed with morning activity. Charlie had expanded his Veterans Wall, which now included not just military photos, but stories of hometown heroes, civilian supporters, and family members who had served in their own ways. Sarah Mitchell entered, carrying fresh papers from the Heritage Center. "The governor's office called," she announced, joining their table. "They want to use our program as a model for the entire state. Veterans organizations from across the country are requesting our guidelines. What had started in Hamilton was spreading. Other communities were launching their own storytelling initiatives, creating spaces for veterans and civilians to connect, to understand, to heal." Wheeler's journal had been published, its proceeds funding scholarships for veterans' families and conflict resolution programs in schools. Martinez, now a regular at these morning meetings, arrived in his dress blues. "Sir," he addressed Wheeler, "the new class of Marines at the base just finished studying Hill 881. But not just the battle. They're learning about what happened here 3 months ago, about how true strength sometimes means having the courage to forgive." Wheeler nodded, looking around at what his quiet life had become. The medals and honors weren't what mattered anymore. What mattered was this: people coming together, stories being shared, understanding growing like the first rays of dawn after a long night. "You know what David would say about all this?" he asked the group. He'd say, "We're finally telling the right story, not about war, but about what makes peace possible, not about fighting, but about healing." Through the window, they could see a school bus stopping outside the Heritage Center. Another group of students arriving to learn, to listen, to understand. Jacob stood, preparing to meet them. It was his turn to share the story, to continue. The cycle of understanding that had begun with his own moment of shame and redemption. "Mr. Wheeler," he said before leaving, "would you join us today? The kids? They really understand better when they hear it from both of us." The full circle of the story. Wheeler looked at his coffee cup, at the booth that had once been his shelter from the world, and then at the faces of those around him. Martinez, Sarah, Charlie, all the others who had become part of this continuing story of redemption and understanding. "You know, Jacob," he said, standing, "your grandfather once told me that the true measure of a life isn't in the battles we win, but in the bridges we build." He straightened his jacket, where the town's Medal of Understanding now rested. Let's go build some more bridges. As they walked toward the Heritage Center, the morning sun warming their faces, Wheeler thought about all the twists and turns that had led to this moment. One act of disrespect had opened a door that no amount of parades or ceremonies had managed to unlock. One moment of hatred had blossomed into 1,000 moments of understanding. The students were filing into the center as they approached. Above the door, the words of the mission statement gleamed in the sunlight, but it was the smaller plaque beside it that caught Wheeler's eye, the one Jacob had insisted on adding. In memory of Master Sergeant David Turner, who taught us that the greatest act of courage is to transform hatred into understanding, and the greatest act of love is to help others find their way home. Wheeler touched the plaque gently, feeling the raised letters beneath his fingers. Then he straightened his shoulders and followed Jacob inside, ready to share their story once again, ready to help another group of young people understand that the true heroes aren't those who never fall, but those who have the courage to rise again, to learn, to grow, and to show others the way forward. The door closed behind them, but the story, their story, everyone's story, continued on, a testament to the enduring power of brotherhood, forgiveness, and love. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of the power of understanding, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds that unite us all.